Chapter 16. President Calderon asked my father for a favor. Of course he did. From the moment the war began, 20 people were looking after me. They were the ones my father provided for my protection. There were 2 cars, sometimes 3, with 4 people each. Not all 20 were with me at the same time. They had shifts. 10 would work from 10 or 15 days, then take a week off and be relieved by another 10. I never saw them. There were some I didn't even know. Though it may seem untrue, but it's true. That's for other people that think they walk around with 100 men. 20 sounds, like the heavy side, and he never even seen them. We hear stories of Mayo in this book getting, pulled over at a checkpoint with 2 or 3 people. The man in charge of them was called Yipi. He was in charge of one group, and the other was a man called Ismael, and the other Queta. This is how I've always handled things. For example, the house where I lived, or was with my family, no one knew where it was, only me. Those in charge of my security, whether Yipi, Ismael, or Queta, knew where it was in case I needed anything at night or whenever, but the rest didn't. And in my house, there was me, my wife, my children, and the cleaning staff. Oh man, que buena vida. Shaw, you're a hater. Shut up. I tried to live very simply, avoid attracting attention, and live like a normal person. I didn't go to restaurants, malls, theaters, parties, or anything like that. For example, I lived in a private residential complex in Mazatlan. The people who looked after me had their offices about 3 blocks away. In the mornings, when my wife took the children to school, a car accompanied her. I also patrolled the area where I lived. Then, when my wife went out to pick up the children, they also went with her. But neither my children nor my wife realized this. I would inform the men who looked after me of the schedule, and they would wait somewhere nearby in the complex and follow her. So they didn't know where I lived or when I was leaving the house, because sometimes I would go pick up my children from school or somewhere else. I would call 15 minutes before leaving for Yipi. I'm going out for a walk, and they knew what to do. When I left my house or condo, they were already waiting outside. When I was returning home, I would let them know 2 or 3 blocks before they were to drop me off, and that way they didn't know where I lived. During the day and at night, there were also 2 people patrolling where I lived in cars and motorcycles. I don't know who they are, nor do I have any contact with them. If something happens, for example, if the government is nearby, they notify Queta or Yipi. The one who notified them was Dr. Roberto Beltran Burgos, the doctor, who worked for Chapo and my father. Queta would call me if he notified them if the government was preparing an operation. For example, he would call me to say, just so you know, the federal police informed me that they're going to be in a certain part of the city, just so you know. And I would say, okay. Or for example, they would say, they informed me that they're going to search a house and want to know if it's yours or if it's ours. And I would say, well, no, ask the others. And that's how it all worked. But I never saw the federal police or the government soldiers. I know that the ones in charge of that were Doctor and Queta. For example, when a new PF commander arrived, the departing commander would introduce the newcomer. And when I went to Mazatlan or Culiacan, I would inform the person in charge of my surveillance. I would notify Queta about half an hour beforehand, so he could check with the PF that everything was okay on the highway. The PF made sure there were no checkpoints or soldiers at the toll booths along the highway. They would send a car in front to inform them about the road conditions. Others followed me at a distance. The 2 cars that escorted me. That's how my security worked, and this was my way of protecting myself. There was also division within the ranks of the Sedena. Those who had previously served the Federation had to decide which side they were on. One of those in that situation was General Roberto Miranda Sanchez, who had so kindly invited Vicentillo to breakfast at Los Pinos in 1998. She doesn't differentiate when she's talking or when he's talking. It's kind of ridiculous. Between 2001 and 2003, Vicentillo confirmed his loyalty to Vicente Carrillo Fuentes and his father in Quebec. By 2008, things had changed. Miranda, a major general, was commanding the 3rd Military Region based in Mazatlan, Sinaloa. In 2007 and 2008, General Miranda was sent to Mazatlan. By then, the war with Arturo and Vicente Carrillo had begun. And as soon as the general arrived in Mazatlan, the first thing he said on the news, and it was also known by Chapo and my father, was that he was going to arrest Chapo and Mayo or see them die. And he, Miranda, began a strong campaign against us. Chapo and my father. But the whole family was affected. My mother, my sisters, and my house were searched every week throughout 2008. It was pure harassment. When you said a strong campaign against us, you were right, because you are us. It's not Chapo and your father. You are part of that. That is part of you, okay? You were the guy. You were the crown prince. You were the one that they were going to give all of the plugs and information to run things for the next 50 years. It was you. Did they see technology coming? Did they see Trompito coming? They didn't see none of these things, but you were the guy. So stop pretending that you weren't. There was another general in Culiacan who was in charge of the 4th Military Zone. I also know his name. I'll say it later. But he was also Vicente Naturo's people. They were paid by our enemies. They searched our ranches, businesses, and homes. They robbed every place they raided. They didn't leave any furniture or cars. They just stole. They entered without a search warrant or anything. I know this because Chapo told my father that the 2 generals were Vicente Carillo's men. Another military friend of his told Chapo that they should be very careful because they were being targeted by the enemy everywhere. And that's because those generals are corrupt. One, because I saw it myself, but since his loyalties lay more with Vicente Carillo, he was on his side. The general was removed before I was arrested. By then, I learned from my father and Chapo that Chapo was working with his friends to remove him. One of the things is that Chapo gave money to a colonel and a lieutenant colonel, and they were the ones who informed him of what the generals were doing. They were receiving orders to only go against Chapo and Mayo, not to go to Navolato or anything related to the Carillos. But even so, they carried out operations in Navolato. They did them for my father and Chapo, and the operations were carried out by the colonel on his own. One was in charge of the battalion in Guamuchil, and from what I know, Damaso was the one who saw him. I don't know the name of the colonel who was in Culiacan, but I know that Damaso saw him and was available to Chapo and my father. My father and Chapo gave them coordinates of houses, ranches belonging to the Carillos. They found a lot of weapons, armored cars, and arrested many people. The general in Mazatlán, Miranda, got very angry and scolded the colonels. But he couldn't do anything since people were arrested. Many weapons confiscated, safe houses, and it was all over the newspapers. So it wasn't in the general's interest to punish them because they had done the job they were supposed to do, attacking organized crime. But the general, Miranda, was very angry because they had carried out an operation in Navolato without his authorization because the general was corrupt. I saw him in Los Pinos, and he's known as Vicente Carillo's people. From December 2007 to December 2010, the commander of the 4th Military Zone based in Culiacan was Major General Noé Sandoval Alcazar. His last position was as Undersecretary of Defense from 2014 to 2016. General Miranda left the 3rd Military Region in February 2009. From 2009 to 2011, he served as Comptroller General of the Army, and his last position was as Chief Officer of the Sedena, National Security Forces. The war between El Mayo and El Chapo against the Beltran Leyva, Zetas, Carrillo Fuentes gangs not only caused casualties in the military, families, and the government, but also harmed businesses. The routes Mayo used, guarded by the federal police or the federal intelligence agent, became unsafe, especially the one coming from the south. Even so, 2 Mayo operators in Belize managed to coordinate the arrival of 2 tons of ephedrine, which they would then transport to Culiacan. El Chapo had already sent people there, to Belize, and that the port was ready to unload the ephedrine, but he had no way to get the merchandise from Belize to the Mexican side. My father told him that he would take care of that Marcos was there in Chetumal and Chiapas, and that Marcos and Benny had already obtained equipment and people in Belize to smuggle whatever they needed. They found a ranch on the edge of the border and that they could cross the river in small boats, and that they had also already obtained boat equipment to receive either boats or ships in Belize or Guatemala. El Chapo told my dad, "Oh, it's great that you found equipment, and I'll find someone to send us work. All we needed was equipment." That's what I heard. In mid-2008, I learned that Chapo had received the merchandise, ephedrine, through Belize. I found out because my dad told me to locate Marcos and connect him with Damaso Lopez, Chapo's manager, to help him smuggle some things that Chapo had received through Belize into Mexico. So I called Marcos and told him that what my dad was saying, and they gave me Damaso's number, and I passed it on to Marcos so that they could talk and come to an agreement. About 10 days later, I saw my dad, and he told me that he had contacted his friend Chapo and that the things he had received in Belize were already here in Mexico and that Marcos had them stored, and that if I was coming down from the mountains where I went to see him, I could talk to Chepe or Jose so that they would send Arqui, Luis Alberto Cabrera Saravia, with the truck over there, with Marcos, so that he could bring things. I told him, okay, just tell them they know what to do, my dad told me. But he also told me that he and El Chapo were afraid that the pipe would be stolen or kidnapped by their enemies. By then, the war with Arturo Beltran and the Zetas and Vicente Carrillo Fuentes was already underway. The Zetas had everything under control in the south, and since Arturo and Arturo's people already knew about the pipe, because for a long time my dad used to lend it to Arturo for the same purpose, they would know that by going to Chetumal, the pipe would mean work. And since the Zetas and Arturo were into robbing and kidnapping, something might happen to the pipe. But he said, no way. They were going to send it and see what happened. That's how it was. When I came down from the mountains, I told Chepe that my dad had sent him. About 4 days later, Chepe called me one night saying he wanted to talk to my dad and that it was urgent, and if I had a way to communicate with him. I told him yes, I could use a radio. Chepe told me to tell my dad that Alki was talking and that they had stopped the truck in Tabasco, so my dad would know, but that Alki was already working with the PFP to see what was going on. El Alki is the person who's been escorting the pipeline and paying off the authorities in each state to keep it from being stopped. But since the war was going on with Arturo and the Zetas, and a lot of the government was also in their favor, and the ones holding the pipeline were Zetas people, he sent me word through Chepe that he was already talking to him, and that he was asking for $150,000 to release it. And he wouldn't tell the Zetas or Arturo's people. My dad said it was fine, and that I should give it to him. Later, Chepe told me that they had already dropped the pipe, but that Alki saw suspicious people following them, who would later report back once they left the state of Tabasco. At dawn, Chepe called, saying that Alki was calling him. Entering the state of Veracruz, 2 pickup trucks full of people dressed as federal agents had arrived at the first toll booth and had taken the truck along with the driver and 2 other people from the stationery store, as well as the gas company's truck drivers for anything they might need. They said they had taken them all, but Alki had managed to escape with his driver. Neither the truck nor the people were ever seen again. Days later, my dad and Chapo found out that the Zetas and Arturo had stolen it. And from what I heard from Chapo and my dad, the pipe had 2 tons of ephedrine and 500 kilos of cocaine that Chapo had received through Belize. That this was the first thing they sent him to the port of Belize to test and see how everything would turn out. And that the last thing they expected was for it to be stolen. But what more could you expect from the Zetas? If that's what they did, and that was what I knew and heard. My dad and my friend Chapo discussed the possibility of setting up a laboratory for themselves to process methamphetamines, but I never heard if they did it. El Mayo lost more drugs through robberies by his enemies than through seizures by the Calderon administration. So at that time, he opted for the maritime route. He preferred to lose the drugs in a Navy operation than have them fall into the hands of the Beltran Leyva family. A sea route was devised from South America to Sinaloa. His corrupting power reached a small fishing village on the Pacific coast, turning them into traffickers overnight. In 2008, they received a job in Culiacan, and I knew about it because the boatmen, or those who go to meet the boats, are my father's people. They are fishermen who live close to the beach called Altata, and the person in charge of the boatmen, or pangueros, is called Colas. I don't remember his name, but I've known him for years, because I have a house there, and when I went for weekends, he would help me with whatever I needed. Boat rides, taking my children for walks, and all that kind of thing. They worked in a fisherman's cooperative. That's how they made a living. And when my dad needed other work, he'd hire them. But as far as I know, they hadn't worked for my dad for years because everything was done down south. But they were always there for anything. They were my dad's people by then, and my dad helped them. And so when he got another job, they were ready. Altata, a place where water abounds, is a quiet coastal port on the Pacific, located 27 kilometers from Navolato and 62 kilometers from Culiacan. It's mostly pristine beaches, contrast with the sand dunes. Canoeing and sport fishing for dorado, marlin, and sailfish are popular. The sites belong to a protected natural reserve area of more than 9,000 hectares, home to mangroves, reefs, whale, and dolphin watching. The Sinaloa cartel's influence reached this oyster fishing village, not only because of the properties they own, but also because of the extra work they provide the fishermen. At the end of the day, you leave poor people to their own devices and you leave them to themselves, they're going to do what they can do, man. My dad told me to tell Colas that he needed them for a job and to discuss it with Damaso so they could come to an agreement. What I did was connect the boatman with Damaso and they made an agreement over the radio. I was in Mazatlan at the time. Colas went there to Mazatlan. I told him what my dad said and gave him Damaso's number, and he came to see me. About a month later, the job came up, and my dad and Chapo's people came to pick him up. As always, the guy in charge told me to let the gentleman know we're vacating, that everything's okay, and that the things had been handed over to Damaso or Chapo's people, that they were already stored. I didn't look at the merchandise. I didn't know where it was stored. The person in charge of all that was Juancho or Damaso, and it was the same as always. My father would sell his share there in Culiacan to Lamberto, El Man, or Juancho, or he would do whatever he wanted with it. Since I was with my dad in the mountains, the following month, I went to see him. Sometimes I stayed with him for a day or two because I hardly ever saw him anymore. I lived in Mazatlan and saw him every 20 days or a month, although he often heard from me and I heard from him through his secretaries or through his radio. I had to get a signal with him in the mountains, but it was only for urgent matters or a quick hello, because we didn't talk much in the case the government intercepted him. That's why I would go there and stay for a day or two. Since it was so far away, sometimes I couldn't get back on the plane, especially during rainy weather. That's when I would see Chapo there with him. Sometimes they would get together to greet each other or talk about their things. There I learned from them that a second job was coming, that they had caught it in Huatulco, or Oaxaca. It was a 4-ton ship. It was on the news and all that. There, Chapo told my dad that it was theirs, but that the tugboat had towed it to port and they had found the clavo, the secret compartment, but that it was too bad and that he was already organizing another one that was ready to leave from there in Colombia. My dad told him that it was fine, that whatever he did was fine. From what I know, Chapo is the one in charge of working. He sees the Colombians and does the business, and my dad informs him what he's doing, and my dad tells him to go ahead, that whatever he's doing is right. On November 4th, 2008, very close to the official residence of Los Pinos in the heart of Mexico City, the plane-carrying Secretary of the Interior Juan Camilo Mourinho, President Felipe Calderón's closest and most beloved collaborator, crashed. Also on board, among others, was Deputy Attorney General José Luis Santiago Vasconcelos. According to the Calderón administration's official version, it was an accident. According to Mourinho's relatives, it was an attack carried out on the orders of El Mayo, a reminder to the president that he must honor his commitments. And according to Ray, he doesn't know what happened. Ray told the story that El Chapo had wanted to kill Santiago Vasconcelos since 2005 because he was incorruptible. However, in reality, the official had been very kind when he returned to Establo Puerto Rico Ranch to El Mayo in 2001. They asked me to be part of the plan to help locate him and to help provide security for the gunmen they were going to use to kill him, Ray said. My brother Mayo told me, let's help my friend Chapo. Chapo wants to kill Vasconcelos, so let's help him with that. It wasn't unusual for Mayo to pass off Chapo's wishes as his own. The infallible Mechudo, Mayo's hitman, was commissioned to kill him. He had already located him, but Ray didn't want to participate. He thought there would be a lot of trouble if they did, and he was worried that there might be innocent victims. Oh, you guys worried about? I've never heard of you guys worrying about innocent victims before. That's new to me. Well, forget it. If you don't want to participate, forget it, Mayo told him. By 2008, Mechudo had already effectively killed high-ranking federal police officers. Ray said the plot to kill Santiago Vasconcelos never materialized, but he was already out of the picture and in prison when the Learjet crashed on Paseo de la Reforma, killing the passengers and 5 people who were walking in the streets. I think of Gaciola's maxim, in the Sinaloa cartel, no one knows what they don't need to know. That's why the cartel survives. Compartmentalization. Right hand don't know what the left hand's doing? So he can't fuck up what the left hand's doing. In October 2008, before Ray's arrest, one of Mayo's objectives was to acquire more powerful weapons. He was particularly interested in M16 rifles with grenade launchers, a weapon that not only fires rapidly but can also cause large explosions. That month, there was a meeting between El Mayo, Felipe Cabrera, Vicentillo, Juancho, El Chapo, and Germán Magaña. Margarito Flores from Chicago also attended the meeting, held at one of the ranches in Vascojil, Durango. He and his twin brother Pedro were old clients of Germán. El Mayo now wanted to connect them with Cabrera, who, in turn, was looking to expand his heroin market in Chicago. Cabrera was one of Mayo's best clients. He bought a lot of cocaine from him, which Cabrera then distributed on his own. So if he expanded his markets, he would benefit. Vicentillo took the opportunity to ask Margarito if they could help them obtain M16s with grenade launchers in the United States. The twins said yes, easy peasy. For a while, contact was lost. Margarito tried to call him, but Vicentillo wouldn't answer. However, after his uncle's arrest and the plane crash, there was no other option. So they asked the twins for weapons. The twins said that they could get them weapons, and then they lost contact. Are you still interested in the guns? Margarito asked Vicentillo. Margarito is Jay, for those that don't know. Jay Flores. He said he had already had the person to get them. Yes, go ahead, Vicentillo replied. Neither he nor his father knew that by then the twins were already collaborating with the Chicago prosecutor's office and had recorded the conversation. That one, and others with El Chapo and his son Alfredo Guzman Salazar, which would cause problems for everyone in the future. We've heard Jay Flores mention that Chapo asked him for young American women, specifically African American women. And the twins were like, Papa, that's not my game. I don't play like that or whatever. I wonder if they weren't cooperating actively at the time, if they would have gave them the same answer, or if the twins would have found them guns. Evidently, the answer was yes, because they were already cooperating, and this was something that they could nail them to the wall with. The war between the members of the Federation became a major conflict for Felipe Calderón's government. Out-of-control violence became a daily occurrence in different parts of the country. Murders of federal, state, and municipal police officers, shootouts in the streets, bodies mutilated, burned, tortured, and displayed in public spaces as part of the campaign of terror by both sides. Not even the worst years of the dispute between the Federation and the Zetas had such a high number of intentional homicides been reached. During Calderón's first year in office, 2007, while the peace agreement between the Federation, the Carrillo Fuentes, and the Zetas was in effect, the number of intentional homicides in Mexico was 8,867. By 2008, the number had suddenly risen to 14,006. The victims were primarily men between the ages of 20 and 44. The international community began turning its attention to Mexico in 2008 due to the rapid rise in homicides, and the worst is yet to come. In 2009, President Felipe Calderón, who according to prosecution witnesses in the Chapo trial, received millions in bribes from the Sinaloa cartel, sent an emissary to El Mayo to ask for help. Vicentillo was present at that meeting. You were the heir apparent. You were the one that was going to sit on the throne. A month before I was arrested, around February 2009, I was at home in Mazatlan, and my father called me to see if I could come to Culiacan, which is where he was at that time, where he could see me before he went to the mountains. I went to Culiacan at that time, which was around 9 in the morning. I went alone in my car with 2 other cars following me. He told me to go to a place I already knew, which is in the municipality of Costa Rica. It's a town near Culiacan. Before reaching the town, as I was driving along the highway, Casillas, my father's secretary, called me and told me to pick up Dr. Colin before arriving. This person is a friend of my father's, and I've known him for years. He was a member of Amado Carrillo's family. He'd been in prison for many years but had recently been released. Casillas asked me to pick him up at the hotel where he was staying and take him to where my father was. Taking advantage of the fact that I was already on my way, and because I knew him well, I went to pick him up at the hotel. He was already waiting for me outside the hotel and got into my car. He and another person, a man with glasses, around 60 years old or older, but a strong man. He greeted me, and I felt like I'd met him before, but I couldn't remember where he was from or if I'd seen him anywhere else, but I left it at that anyway. When we arrived, my father was surprised to see him. My father said, "General, I'm surprised to see you. I didn't expect you. How are you? I didn't know you were coming." From what I saw, my father didn't know that person was with Dr. Colin. And so they sat down in the living room. I stayed near them in the dining room. The general began telling my father that he needed to talk to him and Chapo, that he had some messages from someone and needed to talk to them. They began talking about how the country was doing, about the violence and the problems that started with Vicente Carrillo, with Arturo Beltran and the Zetas, and that sort of thing. My father told me to call Juancho to see if he could contact Chapo. My father told me call him soon because my friend Chapo is near here now. Call him before he goes back to the mountains. I called Juancho and told him my father needed to see Chapo. Juancho said, "Okay, let me call him." About 5 minutes later, Juancho called me and told me he was going and where he should go. I told him Costa Rica, and that when he was near a certain spot, I would send someone to pick him up and guide him to where we were. About 40 minutes later, Chapo arrived and greeted the general with a hug. The general and Chapo seemed happy to see each other because they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The general was also happy to see my father. And the general said, "I'm very happy to see you two together. You're always very kind and men of your word." At that moment, it was just the general, my father, Chapo, me, and Dr. Colin. The General Vicentillo refers to as Mario Arturo Acosta Chaparro, whom I called General X in Los Señores del Narco. At that time, the general himself spoke to a few people about that meeting. It was at that time that El Chapo reportedly told him he paid Vicente Fox a multi-million-dollar bribe to be released from prison, certainly not in a laundry cart. Acosta Chaparro was an old-school soldier, tough and cruel with guerrillas and leftist militants during the dirty war in Guerrero. He was accused of having at least 20 people disappeared. Flexible and conciliatory with drug traffickers, he spent several years in a military prison for his ties to Amado Carrillo Fuentes. When the war between El Mayo and El Chapo against Arturo Beltran Leiva began, it was the Calderon government that released the general. They decorated him and then sent him to El Mayo. The general told them that he was there on behalf of General Galvan, the Secretary of National Defense during Felipe Calderon's administration, who was sending them the message that, please, the government wants to resolve things with everyone so the violence in Mexico could decrease because the government no longer knew what to do. That the Secretary of Defense and the government knew there had been a truce at the time thanks to my father's intervention. My father said yes, that he had spoken with Arturo Beltran Leiva so everything could calm down. And in fact, it was Arturo who had sought him out so they could talk and calm things down. And that on their side, that is, Chapo and my father, there was no problem because the chaos in the country hadn't been caused by them. That they had only had to defend themselves against the enemies in Culiacan. But everything else that was happening in Mexico wasn't because of them, and that the government knew it. That's what my father told the general. They take zero accountability. We're just defending ourselves. This happened over here. No, it didn't. We didn't do that. That wasn't us. It's always a thing with these guys. Betrayal, our betrayal. What you mean our betrayal? We were betrayed. Nah, come on, man. It's a revolving door of betrayal. But they want to accuse Chapo and me of everything, my father said. I know, the general said. I've known them for years and I know who they are. This is all because of the younger generations and other kinds of people. This is why the government is coming after you. Because you're different. You're true to your word. He said the government has sent word to the two that the Secretary of Defense and President Felipe Calderon wanted to see if El Mayo and El Chapo could call a truce and calm everything down. The government was under a lot of pressure and didn't know what to do. The government's message was that if within a month the government saw that there was no more violence, they would withdraw the entire army and federal police from Sinaloa and all other states. My father told the general that there was no problem on his end, but that he couldn't answer for the others, that he and El Chapo were together and that there was no problem for them. But the Zetas, Arturo, Vicente Carrillo, depended on them. The general replied that the government understood this and was already taking charge. He had gone to Matamoros the day before and spoken with Heriberto Lascano and Miguel Ángel Treviño, Z40, and that they had also accepted the proposal. The next day, the general was going to meet with Arturo in Cuernavaca to speak with him, and then he was going to Chihuahua to see Vicente Carrillo. He said he already had appointments with them and was in contact with them, but they wanted to speak with them, El Mayo and Chapo, first. My father and Chapo told him there was no problem for them, that the last thing my father and Chapo wanted was the ongoing war, and that's how the meeting with the general ended. I know who he is. I have his full name, and I'll give it to them when I speak with the DEA, because this person is key to finding the Zetas and Vicente Carrillo Fuentes. And at that moment, all of them, because the general was going to see them and would probably continue seeing them. The general had always been a friend of Vicente Carrillo, my father, and Chapo for years. If they're interested in knowing who he is, fine. I have his name. On April 20th, 2012, after Vicentillo revealed his name, Acosta Chaparro was murdered at 6:15 p.m. in the Anahuac neighborhood of Mexico City. 3 direct shots to the head permanently stopped him from breathing. Since 2010, I revealed in Los Señores del Narco the general's encounters with the Sinaloa cartel. When he was killed, I was already in contact with Gasiola. Friends of the general confided in me that he was in talks with the DEA and had expressed his willingness to talk about those in the Calderón administration who were corrupted by the cartels. People close to him, with whom I spoke again about these episodes, assured me that people in the Calderón government had ordered his assassination. There have been numerous attacks against me and my family since the publication of my book in mid-2019. A U.S. government official confirmed to me that the corrupt police group led by Garcia Luna has been plotting to assassinate me since 2010. The person who told me this seemed surprised. I wasn't. I'd known about it since late September 2010. You telling me they can get all these guys and they could get their hands on these generals, they could touch these generals, but they can't touch her? Stop it. Chapter 17, Packed with the DEA. A week later, my dad called me again, and I went to the mountains to see him. He told me to go alone. They wanted to talk to me. El Chapo and my dad were there. El Chapo started telling me about everything that had happened in Tijuana years before, since he escaped from prison. About how there were almost no Arellano Felix members left. Everyone they'd caught, Chris, Efra, Macumba, Tigre, Nalgón, and a lot of people from Tijuana. I already knew more or less from them, from my dad and El Chapo, that they had sent people to Tijuana, more like El Chapo's people. But my dad knew they were going to wipe out all those enemies of Tijuana. And so, that there wouldn't be wars and deaths, that for everything the federal government was doing, he was helping. That all the arrests were because of them, El Mayo and El Chapo, and not because the government had done it with efforts and operations, as they said on TV. That they had arranged for several groups of the PFP, but that apart from that, he had other people helping him. That everything had been done by his compadre Loya, who was the one he had sent there, and that he and Chapo passed all the information to Loya and his action group, and that he and my dad had talked about my situation, that every day they linked me more with them, that I was second in command, and that every day that passed, they unintentionally were involving me more in their things, and that since I had always wanted to live a different life, they wanted the same thing. That they had spoken with Loya some time ago to see how I could fix my life and get away from them. And that was where he actually told me that he was working with the DEA. I always wanted a different life. I never wanted to be that guy. They made me that guy. They unintentionally made me that guy. I wasn't a gangster. I don't know, bro. And that's when he told me he worked with the DEA. Humberto Loya Castro, alias Mr. Perez, was born on March 3rd, 1957. He would be a 62-year-old now if he's still alive. He is a lawyer originally from Sinaloa, a friend, partner, and advisor to Joaquin Guzman Loera since at least 1988. According to his own account in a letter dated July 14th, 2010, a copy of which Fernando Gasiola gave me. The letter has been hidden all these years and reveals a crucial episode for understanding the history of drug trafficking over the past 20 years. I first revealed Loya Castro's existence in Señores del Narco in 2010. It was in fact one of the reasons Vicentillo asked Gasiola to contact me, to describe the circumstances of his trial in Chicago and the agreements between the DEA and the cartel. For that reason, and because I was one of the few journalists to reveal President Felipe Calderón's false war on drugs and the complicity with the Sinaloa cartel at the highest levels of government. In 2011, I documented these agreements in the online magazine Reporte Indigo. Years later, other media outlets will cover the same issue as a supposed scoop. What some wanted to portray as new news was, to me, old news. I was a front row witness to something no one could have imagined was happening. I pointed out that when El Chapo was in prison in 1993, Lawyer Castro worked alongside his brother Jesus for the Beltran Leyva brothers and for Amado Carrillo Fuentes, and indirectly for El Mayo. The PGR files stated that he was in charge of purchasing positions in the federal judicial police and placing commanders on his payroll. He also negotiated with military commanders involved in Amado's protection rackets and distributed bribes at various levels of government while El Chapo was in prison. Lawyer Castro would visit him and send him messages from his cousin Arturo. The president of Mexico needs to stop this whispering, and her predecessor needs to stop this whispering and stop pretending that all of these governmental connections just ended when the administration switched. You know, this is ongoing, bro. 50 years of this shit. Mexico, how could you deny it? You guys are giving up the reins to your own country because the greed has been going from seat to seat. Those jobs been in place for a long time, and those jobs been getting paid for a long time. Lawyer Castro wrote, in 1987 and 1988, I met Joaquin Guzman Loera, known to me as El Chapo. In connection with a case he asked me to handle involving the arrest of 2 people. Eventually, El Chapo and I became friends and compadres in 1990. I met Ismael Zambada Garcia, known to me as Mayo. His son Vicente was a child then, before meeting Chapo, but I have never had as much friendship with them as I've had with Chapo. I became a legal advisor and confidant to El Chapo and El Mayo, as well as members of the group popularly known as the Sinaloa cartel. I got to know other cartel members and served as their legal advisor. I knew what they were up to and that they were transporting drugs to the United States. El Chapo said that Lawyer was with the DEA with his permission. See? The rules are not for them. The rules are for you. They give permission. For snitching, ratting, working with the police, whatever it is, they give permission. And that everything they were doing, the arrests of members of enemy groups and all of that, was based on information from him and my dad. And that the DEA was the one acting with the Mexican government. That Lawyer was cooperating with El Chapo to fix his legal situation in the United States, and that Lawyer had already fixed everything he had done in Tijuana and other things he had helped the DEA with. That the DEA had sent word to El Chapo through Lawyer that of all of them, I was the only one who could fix it. Because what I had in Washington wasn't that big a problem, and that it had been fabricated by some witnesses when I was about 17 or 18 years old. That it had no basis, and that they knew I was calm, that I had nothing to do with what was happening or had happened throughout my youth. That it was logical, being El Mayo's son, that my dad did it to protect me. The DEA asked if I was able to approach the American government and help them and myself. He told me that El Chapo had been working with them for some time. In his letter, Lawyer noted that in 1994, he and El Chapo were indicted in the Federal District Court for the Southern District of California for drug trafficking. The letter provides further details. In an effort to resolve the indictment, I met with ICE agents in Monterrey, Mexico, in 1998. The ICE agents told me that because of my connection to El Chapo and the Sinaloa cartel, the U.S. government believed I could provide them with information about the Vicente Carrillo Fuentes group and the Arellano Felix group. Each of these groups was a rival of the Sinaloa cartel. I told them I needed El Chapo's approval. I received El Chapo's approval while he was in prison. If I did this, the agents promised they would help me dismiss the indictment. This is what Minileak was talking about when he says Vicente tried to make a deal with them early that didn't work out so well, and then things happened. I met again with ICE agents in Monterrey, Mexico and Mexico City, and gave them the information I received from El Chapo regarding his rival groups in Mexico. The agents then asked me for information on the Sinaloa cartel. I refused to give them information on anyone from the Sinaloa cartel, and have not done so to this day, July 14, 2010. In 2004, I provided the United States government with additional information about the activities of other drug cartels in Mexico. When Gasiola showed me the letter, I discovered an unexpected, shocking story that would have been hard to believe if Gasiola hadn't given me the contract signed between Loya and the DEA, which were Vicentillo's Chicago trial file, handed over by the agency itself in 2011. So I told Chapo, yes, I would collaborate with the American government, that it was what I wanted most in my life, to live with my family in peace, in a different life. Then my dad told me to go ahead, that he wanted the best for me as his son, and that it was the opportunity, after a long time, to live the life I had always wanted, that they would have no problem, that I should approach the government of America and look after my life and my future. You want it out, bro. You want it out after the fact, after all of the shit. El Chapo told me Loya was coming to see me to talk about all this, and I said yes. He warned me that no one knew about this, that it was very delicate and between us. So, so all you people in the comments with all your theories and I know this because of this and this because of that. Now, some of these things was between them. You know why? Because they can't have their subordinates knowing that they're giving permission to people to use police to get their enemies, to snitch, to do this, to do that. In 1998, while Loya was meeting with ICE, El Chapo sent a message to the DEA office in Mexico saying he wanted to talk to them about the Arellano Felix brothers, his enemies. The meeting was attended by Larry Villalobos, former head of the DEA intelligence in Mexico, and Joe Bond, operations supervisor, who had been investigating him for years. 16 years later, Larry and Joe told me about that meeting, which took place in an office at the maximum security prison in Puente Grande. They told me that El Chapo explained that he no longer had people working for him on the outside, that he no longer had any power, and that they were accusing him of participating in the murder of Cardenal Posadas Ocampo. But that wasn't true. He was furious because while he was in prison, the Arellano Felixes were free. What El Chapo wanted was to hand over the brothers, Villalobos told me. You get us the data, give us something we could look at, and see what we can do, Larry told Chapo at the end of the meeting that lasted more than 3 hours. Are we going to see each other again, asked Chapo. Yes, we'll see each other again. Is turning in your enemy snitching? If it is, miss me with the picking and choosing. If using the police against your enemies is not snitching, then you guys got to rewrite the book, man. But that never happened again. In 2001, Guzman Loera escaped from prison. Because of their positions in Mexico, Larry and Joe assured me they had information about Guzman Loera's escape from Puente Grande in January 2001, and that there was complicity among officials in Vicente Fox's government beyond those who worked at the prison. This coincided with what Gasiola was telling me. Larry and I coordinated all of that perfectly. We knew there was a very deep corruption network at the time. We couldn't directly verify who the person was, but there was obviously cooperation with some people who gave him the opportunity to leave the Puente Grande federal prison, Joe said. Shortly after the escape, El Chapo reestablished contact with the DEA through his then partner, Griselda Lopez. From what I understand, Larry and Joe didn't stay in touch with El Chapo, but other agents evidently did. Of course. You ain't got one, you got the other. When El Chapo left Puente Grande, it was clear to Larry and Joe that the drug trafficker had quickly reintegrated into the criminal world, as he had the help of El Mayo, who put his high-level government connections to work for him, like so many nickels and dimes in his pocket. We knew he had a network of people who would protect him in the Mexican government and in other governments. He had a certain network through which they would move money, drugs, and transportation. He had very well-established cells, Joe added. And he was the engineer of that criminal structure, I asked? As we know, Mayo Zambada was a teacher for them. He was a huge influence on Chapo, Joe responded, adding, everyone thinks Chapo was the boss of everything, but for me, he was Mayo, and he still is Mayo. There was no doubt for the two DEA experts, El Mayo has been the most powerful drug lord in Mexico. El Mayo needed someone who could be like a manager. And he knew that El Chapo was intelligent, that he had the ability to kill anyone on his orders, and that he had people very loyal to him. And El Mayo didn't have to be directly involved in decisions that were going to be very difficult. In short, Mayo was hiding behind Chapo, like that time in 2003 in the Las Coloradas ranch in Tamazula, Durango, when they thought the military helicopter was going to capture them. Remember when they say he ran off? Chapo strapped up? I don't remember. Is that how it went down? I saw Loya. I saw him in Mazatlan. He told me that Chapo had told him about my situation some time ago and that he had already spoken with the DEA, and they agreed to let me come and help in any way I could. Loya told me he'd been working with them for years. He didn't say how many years, but I imagine 4 or 5 given everything that had happened in Tijuana. He told me they'd already arranged for him and that he was there talking to me on their orders. They were already asking Washington for permission to make the appointment with me, that they would let me know and therefore to stay as far away as possible from all of my father's or Chapo's business. They wanted me to help them with their enemies, who at that time were Arturo Beltran Leiva and the Zetas and Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, which was what interested them most because they were the ones causing all the chaos in the country. That they were not going to ask me for anything from Mayo and Chapo, but that they were interested in that time in Arturo and the Zetas. By then, I already had several things to tell about them. I was investigating everything I could about them so that when I returned with the DEA, I'd have a detailed account in case we came to an agreement in the talks. In those days, before seeing Loya, Arturo had spoken. He had sent word to my dad to please take his call. After several months of war, so many things had already happened in Culiacan and throughout the country. My dad took the call and Arturo told him please, he wanted to stop the war. If they would forgive him, that it was the worst thing he'd ever done in his life and that if the violence stopped, the government would stop harassing him. That it wasn't going to end and that he knew that El Chapo was campaigning with the government. That he was the one that was sending the government out. But that he wanted a truce now. My dad told him that it was fine for him. That it was the best news he could receive that day. And not about deaths and gunshots like the days before. That things had gone so far and for nothing. That he still didn't understand, but that it was never too late. And that for him, that is, my dad, right now he was telling his people to stop everything there in Culiacan. Because he didn't have people anywhere else but there, in Culiacan. And that he answered for El Chapo, because he was his boss. That he was calling him right now to tell him. But he, Mayo, couldn't answer for all the other enemies Arturo had made against him. That Nacho, Ignacio Coronel, and the members of the Michoacana family were friends, but they were in another state, and that he wasn't responsible for all those people, much less for the members of their family, whom he didn't even know, my dad told him. For now, he was responsible for El Chapo, and that Arturo should find a way to send for Nacho and the members of the family. That's what my dad said to Arturo on that call. I was standing next to him listening, and finally, as they were about to hang up, Arturo asked him where I was, and my dad said he's here with me. He handed him over, and I said hello. He hung up, and then my dad told me to see what was going on. He thought it was strange that Arturo wanted a truce, but he was happy to do it as long as they stopped killing innocent people, and not so innocent ones, too. The next day, he sent Arturo's radio station number so we could contact him if anything happened. My dad left it with one of his secretaries so he wouldn't have to carry it himself, and the fact that it wouldn't work in the mountains was hard. It was a Unifone radio station. I wrote down the station number and gave it to Loya so that he could give it to the DEA. El Chapo told me that the DEA had told Loya that the number had been very helpful, that they thanked him very much, and that they were already working on my appointment. So Mayo just called. He said, Arturo called Mayo. Mayo said, it's all good, it's gravy. And then they took that number and they gave it to the feds. For the last 10 years, the distance between the United States government and El Chapo has been one man, Gacciola told me in 2012, referring to Humberto Loya. In 2004, ICE agent Esteban Monk asked Loya to meet him in Monterrey, according to the letter signed by Loya that I have in my possession. The meeting was attended by DEA agent Eduardo Martinez, a man named David, and a member of the U.S. consulate, apparently also from the Drug Enforcement Agency. Loya wrote, in that meeting with representatives of the DEA, we discussed my formal charge. The DEA told me they could secure a dismissal and remove any further criminal problems I had in the United States as long as I provided them with reliable information leading to the arrest of individuals from other cartels, and that arrests and drug seizures in Mexico and abroad were made. I told them I needed El Chapo's approval and that any cooperation had to be under the condition and understanding that I would not provide information about the Sinaloa cartel's activity. They agreed. So I asked El Chapo for his approval, and he gave it to me. Approval. All right? Approval. That whole year, 2008, I lived in Mazatlan. I barely saw Juancho or anyone else. I would check on my dad every 15 or 20 days, sometimes even every month and a half. Eventually, El Chapo sent me word that Loya wanted to talk to me, that he was going to send him to Mazatlan just like the last time. I picked him up and took him to a house of mine in Mazatlan. He told me that the DEA had already been authorized by his bosses in Washington, that everything was fine, that I shouldn't worry, that he was going with me, but that they didn't want to come to Mazatlan because there were some of their DEA people there and they didn't want anyone to find out. And if they went, they had to let them know. So the best thing was for me to go to Mexico City. I told him I'd do everything possible and that if he could fix my situation, of course. He told me he'd let me know the date of the meeting through El Chapo, that he let me know 2 days before so I could travel to Mexico City, but that he had already had the authorization from the American government and that it had to be in Mexico City because the person I was going to see was the head of the DEA in Latin America, a man named Carlos. I told him I was fine. In those days, I would go and see my dad and El Chapo every 25 days. Or if they called me earlier, I would go sooner. El Chapo was the one who was in contact with them, the DEA. And he would tell me the date of the meeting and give me a Loya phone number so I could contact him when I arrived in Mexico City. Fernando Garciola explained to me that, thanks to their collaboration with the DEA, El Mayo and El Chapo had practically managed to exterminate their bitter rivals, the Arellano Felix brothers, thus applying the old saying, the enemies of my enemies are my friends. What El Mayo and El Chapo couldn't accomplish alone, they achieved in partnership with the anti-drug agency. Are they that cold as gangsters now to y'all? Y'all like playing this, we gangsters, we not the police shit. Is that enough for y'all to know that they cheated? They didn't play the game by the rules that you guys want everybody to live by on the internet, on the street, in the grammar schools, in the high schools. When these guys were losing, they called the police. That's what they did. It was them who put the Arellano Felixes in the hands of the DEA one by one, Garciola said, referring to the fact that they revealed the whereabouts of the Klan members. In February 2002, Ramon Arellano Felix was murdered in Mazatlan, reportedly on the orders of El Mayo and El Chapo. In April 2002, Benjamin Arellano Felix was arrested in Puebla. Rafael, the older brother, was killed by a man dressed as a clown while at a children's party in Los Cabos in 2013. Javier Arellano Felix was arrested in August 2006. The Americans caught him at a dock in Tijuana. It was false that he was captured in international waters as officially reported, Garciola commented. At the time of the arrest, the U.S. Department of Justice claimed it was the result of 14 months of intelligence work and that the detention had taken place off the coast of La Paz in international waters. According to Loya's letter, the first thing he actually reported to the DEA was the whereabouts of Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, the viceroy. The first piece of information I gave to the DEA came from Mayo through Chapo. Mayo told Chapo that Vicentillo Carrillo Fuentes was in Culiacan, gave him the phone number, and said Carrillo Fuentes would call Mayo in Culiacan. The next day, the agents and I went to Culiacan to wiretap Carrillo Fuentes, but the effort was unsuccessful because the equipment the Mexican authorities were using didn't work properly. Based on the dates indicated by Loya in his letter, this must have occurred after El Mayo and El Chapo killed Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes. El Chapo had no kinship or familiar relationship with the viceroy, but El Mayo did. He had betrayed his godson. The relationship between the Sinaloa cartel and DEA agents became a give and take. Not only was it beneficial for the cartel because it got rid of enemies, but it also received intelligence on operations from the agents. I also heard El Chapo tell my dad things he did with the DEA, that he had sent money to one of them, that he had sent him $20,000 with Loya, that when Loya went to see El Chapo, the DEA agents knew and that they had made sure that Loya left and returned safely. He told them everything they had done in Tijuana, that he, El Chapo, and El Chapo had introduced them to some people who were Arellano's people before, one they called Niño. He was Mayo's people at the time, and he was the one who passed information to El Chapo and Chapo to the DEA, but that it was better that he introduced him directly to the DEA, and they had seen him in Tijuana, and that he was the one who passed them all the information. In turn, Loya gave Chapo information from the DEA. When there was going to be an operation in Culiacan, when the DEA were in Culiacan and Mazatlan, Loya informed Chapo of everything, and the DEA agreed. They were partners. What did Mayo tell Vicentillo? Hold Chapo close. His DEA connections are invaluable. As 2009 approached, I saw El Chapo. He told me that Loya was going to send him word on the day of the meeting to see if I was ready and if everything remained the same to approach them. I told him and my dad yes, and they told me how great it was, that they had hoped I restart my life because things were getting worse every day, and that the DEA had sent him word that it was great that I wanted to approach them and help, because that year they were planning to put up a billboard or website here in the United States and name me as El Mayo's second in command and his successor to put more pressure on my dad. It's exactly what you were. And that El Chapo's side of the family was going to appoint one of his sons, Edgar, as his successor, just as they had removed the Arellano's nephew. When they got the Arellano's nephew out, Chapo already knew. Loya told him they were going to get him out, and that's what they wanted to do with Chapo's son and me. They weren't going to get anything out of it. Besides, I was voluntarily approaching the government to help them. I was voluntarily approaching the government to help them and rebuild my life. And they wanted to help to rebuild my life, is what it says. All that time, about 10 months ago, I was already investigating and gathering information about the enemies and other information that El Chapo and my dad were giving me. Well, they know more to give to the DEA, and so the day of the meeting arrived. Through Vicentillo's writings, it was possible to learn for the first time that El Chapo paid bribes to a DEA agent in exchange for information about operations. In Guzman Loera's trial in New York, the prosecution, with the judge's approval, vetoed issues such as the agreements between the DEA and the Sinaloa cartel, specifically the agent's relationship with El Chapo. I wonder why. This is corroborated by what Loya wrote, stating the information from the Sinaloa cartel has resulted in specific arrests. When we were at one of the meetings in Hermosillo, Sonora, the DEA agents told me that when I went to see Chapo, I should let him know in advance. They assured me that they wouldn't follow me to the meeting and that they wouldn't interfere with my meetings with Chapo, so that I could stay calm and gather as much information as possible about rival groups or cartels. I informed Chapo that the DEA knew I was going to meet with him. After that, I met with the DEA monthly and provided information that led to the arrest of numerous individuals in other groups, including Ricardo Garcia Urquiza, known as El Doctor, from Carillo Fuentes' then rival group, and El Cris from Carillo Fuentes' rival group, the Arellano Felix. I worked with Ed Martinez of the DEA for approximately 2 years. Then DEA agent Manny replaced Ed Martinez as my DEA contact in 2006. Fernando Gacciola would later reveal in a Chicago court that Manny's name was Manuel Castañón. While Manny worked with me, there were numerous arrests in other groups based on information I gave El Chapo, who came in part from Mayo and Vicente, according to what El Chapo told me, Loya wrote. Mayo and El Chapo's partner and lawyer claimed that from 2007 to July 2010, when he wrote the letter, he spoke with DEA agents on at least 100 occasions, in addition to exchanging numerous emails. I don't know if the prosecution provided El Chapo's defense attorneys in New York with copies of these messages. According to American law, they should have done so. In his letter, Loya added that during that time, a person claiming to work for the United States government gave me information related to the Sinaloa cartel. In exchange, Chapo gave me money to compensate me for the information I provided. Eddie Martinez of the DEA once told me to be careful when talking to Chapo on the phone because the Mexican authorities could listen in, and to not be too explicit in the information I gave Chapo over the phone. I was occasionally allowed to be present during confidential conversations between DEA agents about activities involving the Sinaloa cartel, information I passed on to El Chapo. They were the police, man. Imagine every drug dealer had a cop on his payroll, every single drug dealer. Is everybody a snitch, or is everybody picking and choosing? When these guys were in trouble, they called the police for help. That's what they did. They made deals. Before they made deals, they made deals. We could stop pretending that this corruption is just a made-up story by a bunch of cartel guys, okay? They're all telling on each other. They're all telling on each other. Clear as day, Vicentillo was there to make a deal before he was arrested. And supposedly he thought he could pick and choose whose information he was going to give what, whatever. All these guys were playing both sides. Miss me with the loyalty, the honor, all that bullshit. The joke's on you. The joke's on everybody that believed those things. The joke's on everybody that believes that these guys are stand-up guys. Miss me with the bullshit. And by the way, these 2 chapters, much better than the entire middle of the book. The entire middle of the book is just a list. She could have added like an annex at the end and added a list of all of the names of all the people that he snitched on and all the government. Instead, she jammed it in the middle of this book. What this read like, what we just saw, that's what this was supposed to sound like. That gives me insight. Not a long list of people with 5 names. The rules do not apply to them. They only apply to you. And just because they're traitors and oppressors of the Mexican people, don't make yourself one. Because if you cheer for this kind of nonsense, you're a traitor to your people.